God chooses unexpected people to become unlikely heroes. Abraham, Moses, Rahab, Gideon, Ruth, David, Jeremiah, the disciples of Jesus, Timothy, many others, and many of us didn't look particularly qualified to represent God. However, God doesn't call the qualified. God qualifies the called. Then, even with the most qualified person ever, many people refuse to acknowledge Jesus as the promised Messiah or Christ, even while he was living a miracle-filled and morally flawless life right in front of them. Some folks feverishly focused on fault-finding, and others ignorantly claim that God can't use people with a sinful past. But apart from Jesus, God doesn't have any other kind of people to use. All have sinned, and all sinners are eligible for grace and forgiveness by simply inviting Jesus into our lives as our Savior and King. The more we simply listen to God's words to the exclusion of the contrary words of others, the more our very desires change from the inside out, altering our beliefs and behaviors as a byproduct. Holiness is merely the inevitable result of intimacy with God, not the result of self-reliant striving in the false try-harder gospels of powerless religion. Because of Jesus' scandalous grace and uncompromising truth, he remains the most controversial person ever. And he warns us that following him rather than the world will make us controversial as well. Contrary to popular opinion, loving people is not the same as agreeing with people. Challenging someone's choices does not mean you are challenging their value or worth as a person. Nevertheless, for Christians who refuse to conform to the world's confusion, there awaits lying accusations, deliberate disinformation, and hate-filled persecution. Of course, all of this is ultimately coming from the demons people unwittingly allow to influence their thoughts and emotions. There's been much talk about how divisive the country has become since the election of Donald Trump in 2016. The anecdote that led off this series has been repeated in many variations in many various homes all across the country. That said, polling showing concerns among Americans over the increasingly divisive nature of our engagement actually predates the Trump presidency. The myth that this is new to the psyche of the nation could not be more false, but it was Donald Trump himself who turned the lights on brightly for all to see, regardless of the so-called elitists' desire for the narrative to remain in the dark. Remember all Trump's talk about, quote-unquote, the fake news? Many of us didn't quite understand the scope and scale of the controlled narrative being pushed upon us, but we felt the emotional triggers, and now more and more Americans are seeing just how much propaganda and programming we have been bombarded with nonstop in all mediums. The simple truth is that while who is president matters, who is president isn't all that matters. It is also true that Trump was a revered celebrity and businessman until he began his run for the presidency and began exposing long-standing, deep-seated corruption in once trusted leaders. The question could be asked as to why he was so vilified by the media when he began to challenge the establishment political bodies. For all the nice people wondering why God didn't choose a nice president, God responds, I chose Trump to save you from things you don't even know you need to be saved from. I chose a fighter to take down the professional pretenders and their human trafficking, and to let my people go. I chose Trump because he cannot be controlled. Now, we know Donald Trump's celebrity demeanor and decades-long larger-than-life style might rub some people the wrong way. The media and much of Hollywood, who used to seek his favor, abruptly turned and desperately tried to leverage his celebrity and brand to vilify him as a character supposedly unworthy of respect or consideration, totally disregarding his past successes and substance as a businessman and leader. As it turned out, many Americans and people worldwide felt it was his confidence, unwavering fight, and fierce belief in our country's greatness and traditional values that made him a great leader. His passion for greatness ignited in hundreds of millions of people a renewed sense of pride in being a citizen, along with a newfound purpose in the idea he espoused of making America great again. Trump, who the media dismissed as a billionaire playboy of some sort, awakened the masses as he seemed to speak for the hard-working, tax-paying middle-class people that the overtly arrogant so-called elitists in D.C. and Wall Street and academia had dismissed as irrelevant to the important conversations of the business of this nation. While Hillary and her ilk demeaned the working class and middle America deplorables with her globalist partners and corrupt uniparty moneyed friends laughing and clapping along, the masses felt a spark of, wait a minute, this is my country too. That said, the false description of Trump being the catalyst of the divide totally neglects to admit that the one who was allegedly elected before him, Barack who was falsely presented as a uniter-in-chief, ended up being the great divider in retrospect. When Obama was elected, he was put up as a symbol of how far we had come since Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. But ultimately, he left we the people divided by immutable characteristics, perpetually angry, constantly berated and shamed for being proud of our nation. His administration left the country demoralized and more separated than arguably any president in history. President Trump came into a long, simmering stew of conflict, and by the media creating a caricature of Orange Man Bad as diametrically opposite to Obama as the hope, change, and unity statesman, the cauldron of division was quickly and purposefully taken to the boiling point. Yes, we Americans were manipulated into a divisive state where only those who lurked in the shadows, plotting and planning the controlled demolition of the United States of America for years, could be happy. The division was toxic, unsustainable, and dangerous to this nation and our way of life before Trump won the 2016 election. But understanding why this was done and who was behind it will help us better understand where we find ourselves today. The primary difference in public perception between Trump and Obama, aside from their obvious philosophical and ideological differences, was the way that each was portrayed by the mainstream media. Trump's style was constantly hammered by reporters and pundits as being hostile and angry. He was rarely, if ever, given any positive press, nor was he portrayed as the man many of us have met years ago and saw for decades, who was witty, engaging, compassionate, generous, and genuinely concerned for America's future. Whatever one thinks of that portrayal, what is not debatable is that Obama's style, which was openly hostile to his political adversaries and often towards America itself, did not receive the same sort of negative amplification from the legacy media or Hollywood. In fact, it was completely ignored. Also totally avoided when it came to OBAMA were the mountains of evidence from his earlier life, meticulously laid out by both Joel Gilbert and Jack Cashel, among others, that showed inconsistencies in his own history, as well as a preference towards Marxism and communist ideologies. This was greatly influenced by his close friendship with 60s radical domestic terrorist group, the Weather Underground's Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn, as well as his self-described mentor, Frank Marshall Davis. Information that was crucial for the American people to know about OBAMA's past, and that we should know about any candidate, was completely hidden or ignored as the country was introduced to the one-term senator and community organizer from Chicago in the run-up to his first term. His harsh statements inflaming racial division after Ferguson, Missouri, did not garner even a drop of attention or get the same negative spin as Trump's misconstrued comments after CHARLOTTESVILLE, Virginia. While it is not my contention at all that somehow either of these men, quote unquote, started this, the point is made here to get the listener to understand that the problem is much bigger than any one person. This is a widespread and long-standing corruption involving many characters. And if we are to change the current trajectory of our society and culture, we have to be fearlessly honest that the problem is, in fact, ours. While the polarizing personalities of anointed and amplified leaders of our commingled DC corrupt uniparty have contributed to our division, they have done so more by giving an excuse to the masses to be exceedingly hostile in situations or circumstances that only a decade ago would have been unimaginable. Addiction is a spiritual problem that manifests in the physical world. Nobody forces us to get involved in particular substances or behaviors that are detrimental to our health. We volunteer our time and our attention. We can't blame the suppliers or the dealers of our vices if we continue to buy what they are selling, to listen to what they are saying. We will look more closely at how we got to this point in a future video, but for now, let's just look at where here is.